Okay, so we got water damage on a gaming laptop. This is an MSI GS60 PC. Looks like I've already got the screws out, so let's get this bottom cover off. This one is made of magnesium. Okay, so the customer claimed water damage, and sure enough, I see some indications at the bottom and looks like up near the fan. The bottom panel is pretty helpful in this way. I recorded this because MSI makes you take the battery out like this. I just have to slowly, steadily yank the cable out. There's no little grippy boys on the side of the battery connector. Okay, so I know there's water damage in here somewhere, so it's time to inspect the board. Let's get it out of the case. I'm going to move the cables out of the way, routing them outside the board so they don't interfere. The I/O board attaches to the bottom. There it is right there. So I see some damage in the front. There's a little indicator board right there. It's got a row of lights on it to tell you what the computer is doing, if it's charging or reading the drives or something. The socket looks pretty gnarly. The cable itself looks pretty gnarly too, but I think it's salvageable. Usually you could just scrape the corrosion off, and if there's copper underneath, the cable is fine. I'm going to test the cable for continuity, of course. Here I'm using a mixture of isopropyl alcohol and soapy water to clean this with a toothbrush. I get all the contacts shiny again and inspect the rest of the board off camera. Now we're going to put the board back in there to see if what I did worked. Okay, looks like I'm going to inspect the cable one more time just to be sure. I didn't see any damage on the rest of the board, so I'm going to make sure this is nice and clean. Okay, now this part's important for later. I hooked up my relatively weak DC adapter as a first try shortcut to see if cleaning did anything. You could see it plugged into the side there. It doesn't look like it worked. The machine power's on, fan spin, no display. So this is going to take some more work. Okay, yeah, so it looks like I'm going to try it without the I/O board connected. That's actually a good move. I did see just a little bit of crud right next to it. Hey Arthur, how you doing? Sorry man, you gotta go. Alright, there's that adapter again. Plug in the power. Nothing. Okay, it doesn't look like it was the audio board either. I'm still sitting here because you need to give these modern computers just a little bit more time than normal to boot up from a full power loss. Oh yeah, this is a good move too. I'm going to do a check on an external display. You know, what if the customer got water on the screen cable or inside the screen's own circuitry? Maybe that's why it's not showing up. I opened the case so the Hall effect sensor isn't triggered. I'm giving it time just like before, still doesn't work. Nothing on my external screen. It begins to dawn on me here. I'm realizing, you know, I think my adapter's not powerful enough. I was using a 3.5 amp adapter. My cheap bench supply could do much more. 6 amps at 20 volts if I recall correctly. And these gaming machines need a lot of juice. Okay, battery on. Hooking up the power supply. Okay, so the current settles in at around 1.5 amps. That's just charging the battery. That's not doing anything else. Bad BIOS ROM, hopefully. But I'm just checking everything else to make sure the rest of the board seems okay. You know, there's no obvious super hot spots. Raz wanted help right there. He's a great help. Bye, Raz. Now, this is the fun part. There's the BIOS chip, EN25Q642. I put some flux on and now I'm going to add some solder just to mix that lead-free solder with the leaded solder that I have. And oops, looks like I don't have my fan nearby. I should probably move that closer. Yeah, okay, looks like I did that. Good, the fumes are going away from me now. I can live another day. Okay, the next step involves the hot air gun. I'm going to position it above and to the left of the chip, and I'm going to aim it just at the chip's feet. I don't need to heat the entire chip, nor do I want to heat the battery connector you can see directly below that, or the RAM sockets to the right. If I hit them with too much heat, they will melt. Okay, slowly lift the chip, being careful, putting away my hot air, and I need to get my programmer out. There it is. So it's a XGECU TI-866+2. Very nice name. They've got a new model. It's around 80 bucks. Oops, I'm going to do this on the microscope, it looks like. The cheaper ones are not really worth it. Okay, here's the chip on the adapter, and it is pulling data. So I'm probably querying the chip right now. I'm asking the chip about itself. What are you? That information is also on the back of the chip, but this programmer's programming program has an auto-detect feature which will also query the chip and find that information out for you. I click the button labeled read. The chip gets read. Well-labeled buttons in this program. Oh, this is going pretty quick. Must be a small chip, 8 megs, 16 megs, something like that. Okay, I'm going to save the data I just got from the chip. I'll just add a directory, and now it can live in my giant collection of bad BIOS files. I have a huge collection of dumps of BIOSes that I've collected over the years. Sometimes it comes in handy, so I'll just keep storing them. Enjoy your stay, little one. Okay, after that's saved, I'm going to clear the buffer, and then I'm going to read that same chip again. I'm going to save a duplicate copy and make sure that both files are identical. I'm going to do that by using a program called HXD. HXD is a nice freeware hex editor. I'm going to open each one. Here I drag to select both files and choose compare. That little dialog box told me that they were the same. They are identical indeed. Now I can get a replacement BIOS from MSI's website. Gonna open that, and then I'm gonna extract the file that I just got from MSI into the directory I just made. Glancing at the file sizes, 8 megabytes exactly, they are all identical as far as size. So this file is ready to go. Sometimes you have to take the file and put it into HXD to trim off a little bit, but in this case I could put it directly on my programmer and go to town. Okay, the programmer is smart enough to erase, flash, and then verify that the chip is flashed correctly. That's the programming done. Okay, now I'm going to hit it with some hot air, yes, directly on top of the programmer. These things are seemingly made for taking hot air just fine. The material doesn't really easily melt, it seems, as I've hit this with hot air plenty of times. Oh yeah, this is neat. This masking actually had these labeled 5, 8, 4, and a little tiny 1 right there. So you know exactly which of your 4 pins go where. Okay, I'm going to keep the tweezers stable. Chip's cooled off. I'm going to put this under the microscope and make sure that I've got nice joins. I'll reflow it if needed, if I don't like the way it looks. Now it's time to test. Looks like I'm going to do it outside of the case. Yeah, another good move. Don't put your machine back together until you know it's actually fixed. Okay, I'm shorting out the power on pins with my screwdriver there. It's probably already powered on. It just takes a little while for that little fan on the right to start kicking on. Okay, there it goes. Let's check the power. 2 amps, not bad. 19 volts. Okay, it's drifted a little bit. That fan's not on. This fan is on. External display hooked up, and look at that. Apparently it's Wednesday, June 15th. It is not. I do put it in the case later to make sure that it actually displays on the internal screen as well, and then I test out the rest of the components. Okay, after all that, I'm going to do the thermal paste, so it's a complete job. This thermal paste is pretty nasty, so I'm going to remove it all. Okay, so what did I learn? Well, I learned by taking shortcuts, I ended up wasting time. I should be using my own bench supply so I can watch how much current is being drawn. The amount of current drawn helps determine what the board is, or in my case, isn't doing. If I had been watching the current draw, instead of using the shortcut by plugging in my little weak adapter, then I should have been able to see that even though the fans were spinning, the CPU was not on, nor was the GPU. I know from experience that a battery plugged in will typically pull about an amp, maybe an amp and a half if it needs to. That's all I saw. All the board was doing was charging the battery, which is a very early stage in its boot process. It wasn't even getting to turning on its CPU and definitely not its GPU. There simply wasn't enough power being drawn for either of those chips to be on. They take about an amp or so themselves at boot time. The BIOS controls the initialization of all the compute circuitry, so if the BIOS is somehow corrupt, the higher powered chips never get a chance to turn on. The PCH and the chipset does, but those are special. Another hint was what the customer actually told me at drop-off. They said that it had spilled over a year ago, and everything seemed fine until today. It is a bit unlikely that corrosion from a year ago is going to take out a computer today, so I should have been primed for something else. BIOS reflashing is very common now that Windows forcefully updates the BIOS for you. Windows neither tells you what's about to happen, nor does it make a fanfare of not unplugging your system during the update. I'm constantly reflashing these things. Thank goodness for MSI's habit of putting pure, raw BIOS files for me to use. It's getting uncommon. I generally have to edit BIOS files I get from Dell. Sometimes I have to edit files I get from HP, and all the time I have to edit files I get from ASUS. So that was a pretty easy repair. We were lucky with the BIOS file there. It doesn't usually go that way. It usually takes a little bit more work. I was happy with this repair. I think I did a pretty good job. I covered all the bases. Everything seems to work just fine. Join me again soon. Coming up next, I have a MacBook Air that was a return. Ended up being pretty easy to fix, but the process to get there is an interesting, long, and convoluted one, just like most repairs are. Okay, I love you. Bye-bye.